Thank you. Right. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. I was telling Karen that I really enjoyed this group last time we met. You were actually one of the best groups I ever had in terms of interactions and giving perspective. So I'm hoping today we have that same experience, that you have this energy that we can share with each other. Last time we met, we talked a lot about the foundations of STEM. We talked about science being the process of exploring the properties and attributes of materials, the use of technology and interactive media, engineering, which is something that we need to inject more into our classrooms, and it has to do with the exploring and investigating the function and purpose of things around us. And then, of course, math, which is numbers, quantities, and space within our daily lives. And so we did a lot of analyzing, differentiating between exploration, investigation. And I talked a little bit about when we talk to parents about play-based learning. Some parents think that, oh, kids just play in the classroom. But when teachers say, well, play includes exploration, and they explain it, investigation, and then they explain it, and then play, and they explain that, it shows a big picture why play-based learning is so important and how it develops children's cognition and all these skills and developmental areas. And so we did a lot of that last time we met. For today, we're going to talk about methodologies, some cool methodologies that I've done in the past and that are in a book that I wrote. We're going to talk about inquiry. What does high quality inquiry look like? And we're going to talk about a little bit of lesson planning around STEM ideas. And then that way that you can take the foundation that we focused on last time with the practice that we're going to work on today. Okay, so let's get started. So I wanted to share with you this protocol that I created. When we talk about engineering and architecture, there's always a sequence, there's always a protocol that engineers and architects enter into. They usually have like a 5 or 7 step process that they enter. And so in heart with that process, in the book that I wrote, let me go a little bit. Yeah, in the book that I wrote, I created this protocol that I called thinking protocol. And for the way that it goes is, many times teachers will plan activities for the children, right? They say, oh, we're going to explore leaves, and then we're going to read a book, or they just do activities, right? In this thinking protocol, I use Bloom's taxonomy to get teachers to plan on the type of thinking that the children are going to do. And that's not always the case. I mean, that's a different approach to engaging children. Like, what's the type of thinking I want the children to do? And so here, I think Bloom's taxonomy, and I think we shared a Bloom's taxonomy wheel with you. There's what's considered from lower level to higher level thinking questions. And so what happens here in this protocol, let's say that this is a 2-week, it could be 3 weeks, but 2-week protocol, where in the beginning of a study, in this case, it was a theater, because the teacher that you're going to see in the photos, the children were talking about going to the movies. And so they were really interested in the theater and how it looked. And so the teacher followed their lead and created a theater study. And so in this theater study, for number 1, children were allowed to construct a theater using blocks. And we usually do that. We allow children to just, here, go build whatever you want, whatever comes in your mind, ideate and create. And so after that, the next day, the teacher had an identification activity. So this is different, right? It's not saying that we're going to draw or just explore something. It's specific. Like I want them to identify. And so the teacher brought a photo of a theater, showed it in a whole group, and then identified the elements in the photo. After that, the children went to draw the theater, and the children were able to see the elements in the theater and draw them. The next day, they described what was on a photo, which is different than identifying. And then they went back to construct. The following day, they compared two theaters. And then the following day, they analyzed. And so if you notice, the thinking becomes more cognitively demanding as the protocol goes throughout the 2 weeks. And what I love about this methodology is that sometimes we provide children with these cognitively demanding activities without giving them the foundation they need to make sense of it. And to make sense of it and to participate in the conversations. And so here, when we're allowing the children to construct, identify, draw, kind of like beginning stages, lower level thinking, describing is now, it's more cognitively demanding. Then you're comparing two things, then you're analyzing things, then you're assessing, explaining, and constructing a final theater. And the possibilities are endless to create a protocol where children's thinking is scaffolded over time. And so by the time they get to number 10 and they construct, I'm sorry, my puppy's making noise. Can you put them in the kennel, please? Thank you. By the time they get to number, that's my puppy. By the time they get to number 10 and they construct, now they've had the opportunity to go through all this kind of thinking, all this analyzation, and then they can produce something very extensive. And so let's take a look at this protocol. So here are the kiddos. And then here's number 1. So if you look at the picture on the left, this is the first time children, and these were the little girls, they were just fascinated by theaters because they had gone to see a movie in the movie theater. And so that's the first rendition of a theater. So you see on the left, it's your typical construction, right? Like children just get some blocks and put stuff up, and they call it a castle, they call it a house, they call it a car, and so forth, right? That's typical. However, when we think about in-depth thinking and in-depth and engineering and math and STEM and all of that, this protocol is a good way to keep the thinking going, right? I always say that it's almost like it's almost like throwing some wood chips into the fire so that it keeps blazing, right? That's what we want to do with children. Like you throw these experiences, these questions, just to keep their brain active, keep them their cognitive activity going. And so then for number 2, they identified the elements of a theater. This was the auditorium theaters, right? Roosevelt University, which is a gorgeous theater, right? You just go in there. In fact, here, let me make it small. Let's see if I can make it bigger for you all. No, I can't. Okay, well, it's in the middle. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So there's the theater. It's gorgeous, right? And if you just look at this photo, and she was able to project it in a large scale because of the smartboard. It's beautiful patterns, which is all algebra, which is math, beautiful shapes, beautiful designs, so much geometry, so much technology that goes into this theater, like electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, all of that. And so you see the kids, they're pointing and they're identifying what they see, the shapes, the amounts, the quantities, all of that. After they did that, they went to draw the picture. And so here on the right, you see the photo again. And now we printed it out on a big size, which is 13 by 19. And they drew their little theaters, and each one of them represents what they're interested about the photo, and then they have a conversation about their drawings, right? And so those are like the first 2 days. And then they moved on. The next day, they went to describe. And so the teacher does a write aloud, right? We talk about read alouds, but this is a write aloud. And so children describe the mathematical properties and attributes found in the photo. So the previous day, they identified what was in the photo, right? And then this day, they're describing the mathematical properties of the things that they identified before. So it's literally scaffolding from what children's conversations and thinking was the previous day. And then after the write aloud, the same girls go and now they take part of the photo that they really enjoyed and they represent it with blocks. And you start to see the difference, right? You start to see them look at these photos, look at the patterns, and that looks exactly like the photo. Like it's literally creating the same patterns, the designs, the height, the width, the length, the square area, the perimeter, all of that, right? And you see their faces are so happy that they're able to say, hey, look, we built a real theater, part of the theater. And so the following day, the teacher comes back, and now on the screen, and you can do this if you have a smart board. If you don't, then you just blow up the photos. Or you can even use TV, computer monitors, laptops. But now she brought a picture of the Pritzker Pavilion, and she created a Venn diagram. And so here now the children are comparing both theaters, right? The auditorium theater and the Pritzker theater. One is inside, one is outside. Look at the designs. What's the same? What's different? How would you change it? So all these in-depth conversations are happening as they're comparing both architectures. And that's critical thinking, right? To have them compare both. And so they went back to they went back to the tables to analyze, brought out the photo. If you take a look at this photo, what I did is I cropped out the little girl's initial creations where they created the front of the theater, and I cropped it into the big photo. And so they were happy about that because now their creation is actually in the photo representing the part of the theater that they created, right? And so that just sparks joy, that sparks more critical thinking, right? And they're able to analyze that and have these conversations. So that's step 7. And step 8, children assess together. You see a little girl there presenting her reflection. Now, assessing means that children reflect on the process, describing what was simple, what was challenging, and sharing their perspectives with their friends. And again, just having children up there using professional language about architecture, right, about engineering, that's important, and it's not easy. But that was built up through the first 7 stages. For number 9, they explain their learning, their experiences with their colleagues. And they're sharing how the parts of the theater that they created with the blocks. And so that's another cognitively demanding process. Then finally, they construct their final composition. They decided to use these are the teacher brought out some open-ended materials. They decided to use Legos for the front and some material to represent the Pritzker Pavilion with some materials there. And then you see the photo and see the kiddos with their cute, happy faces. So I'm going to open it up for all of you to give your reactions, feelings, and thoughts about this methodology.
It reminds me of the NACI book too, Big Questions for Growing Minds. Because when you look at the level of questioning, they have things like in there analyze, evaluate, construct, or
Mhm.
create. So
Yeah.
it really intertwines. I'm just wondering, um, does the protocol always follow those same steps? Or have you ever found that maybe some children stay in one step a little longer or duplicate other ones? I was just curious about that.
Um, well, because it's endless, you can have a protocol, and it all depends on the teacher. If they're flexible, you know how we do it in early childhood.
Yeah.
We accommodate, we individualize, we accommodate. And so yeah, we can always you can always change it in the way. That's why it's creative, right? Because we follow the children's lead. If they're not interested in analyzing right now, they still need to identify or describe a little more, then we can do that. Right. So it's not that you have to follow it like that. Definitely there's flexibility. And it's endless because if you look at the protocol, and you use it with Bloom's taxonomy, you can put anything in there. I think that the point is that sometimes, actually, many times, and if not all the times, children's cognitive competencies need to be scaffolded over time. And so with a protocol like this, when you get them to identify, describe, compare, those are like the foundational thinking processes that children need to get into deeper levels of thinking in the near future. And if we just go directly to the cognitively demanding activity, what I see happening many times, whether it's the read aloud in circle time or whether it's construction, a lot of children get missed out. And so you might always have that one or two kids that always answer, and the rest are quiet because they might not know. But here, when you go through this process, you're giving them the chance to build their background knowledge. So they have the power to answer because they have the experience. What about others? Oh, let me see the chat. I love to do lesson studies on something that kids are interested in. I feel when they are interested in it, they retain more of the information. Absolutely. Yeah, you have to get to their heart for them to get into meaningful learning. What about others? What do you think about this protocol? Or what ideas might you have for yourself to use something like this?
You scroll up in the chat, there are some other comments.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Let's see. So they're 4 to 5 year olds. This is a preschool classroom. Reminds me of creative curriculum where we teach off of a topic that a child's interested in. Yeah, absolutely. I think with creative curriculum though, it's like you have all those studies, but not necessarily a protocol, right? You just might have activities in isolation, maybe because it's a rock study, you just go and explore rocks. But to get into a protocol where it's okay, there's rocks, but how do we embed engineering in there? And what kind of thinking do children need to build an engineering project at the end? What's the kind of thinking they need to get there, right? So this is a little bit more uh, thinking specific as opposed to thinking in isolation, just a bunch of activities in isolation. Same thing with project approach, where sometimes it's beautiful. Like you have multiple activities, but are you necessarily prepping the thinking, specifically like lower level to higher level thinking over time that many of our children do need because they're young. That's one of the differences between adult learning and children's learning is that like they don't have enough background knowledge to make meaning of things like we do. All right, this is similar to how our STEM curriculum is designed. Great. I love having a guideline on steps. Oftentimes I can get in a routine, and this is a great extend process. Great, wonderful. Let's see what else. It's great step by step, one day at a time process instead of throwing everything at once. Absolutely. Never thought about doing it this way. We have some pictures of buildings made from blocks, and we make those, but not real buildings, and don't do all these steps. Something to try. Good. Okay. Focused thinking sequence. Yes. Thank you, Shannon. Creative abstract thinking, allowing children to be very creative, productive, and engaging. Cool. Then these are great ideas. We do try to ask questions on what they are building, but never thought to go this in depth with them. Good. Excellent. All right. Thank you for sharing. Those are some great comments. And I hope you can just take this back, and when you use the Bloom's taxonomy wheel that I'm going to show you later, but you should have as well, that's where I get those steps from. And so you just be creative, right? Like, I always say, how do I say this the nice way? Some curriculums are really good for new teachers, and they could be a good resource for seasoned teachers. But if you just use pre-described curriculums, what I've seen in the past 2 decades is that many teachers have missed out on becoming curriculum architects. Like back in the 80s and 90s, we created our own curriculum, and we were really good at creating curriculum, have these conversations about curriculum, and just flowing with the kids. And then once the pre-described curriculums came in, they're good, right? Like it's good stuff, it's good resources, but that takes away from the opportunities for teachers to become curriculum architects themselves. So this is something that would be fun for them to use to be creative and innovative. Let's see, I have 2 things in the chat. My very young 3s might need a little more hammock in their scaffold, but I think it can be done. So you know what? I've done this with toddlers. And there's another protocol. I don't have it here, but it's in my book. But it's called a learning protocol. And so the learning protocol, well, I'll explain it real quick. So in this protocol, the steps are based off of thinking. For the learning protocol, for the younger ones, the steps have to do with materials. And so, for example, when you provide different materials anytime you use a different material, for example, a different kind of pencil or charcoal crayons, it's a cognitively demanding experience because it's brand new, right? And so, for example, children use pencils, right, to draw things. But imagine if you bring the artistic pencils that have different kinds of lead and different kinds of thickness. And so every time you use a different kind of pencil, they have to problem solve. And so if the next day for young children, maybe today you give them a pencil, the next day you gave them a graphite pencil, which is different. Like the lead is softer, so it makes a thicker line. You give them charcoal, now it's a thicker line. And then the next day you give them a different kind of material. And so the thinking is in the materials that you provide over time. And so that actually works well for the younger ones because it's more open-ended, and it's still a protocol, so that every time you have an activity, you're using different materials. So that's what I do for the younger ones, and that's called the learning protocol. And this one's a thinking one. Okay, next step. This is gold right here too. I always say that I love this lesson planner. I've done curriculum for 30 years now. And my teachers, for all these decades, they want it fast and simple when it comes to lesson planning. And so anytime I have a lesson planner that is for teachers, I say 1-pager, give them a 1-pager, and they're okay with it. What they don't want to see is like 5 pages of writing curriculum, and it takes so much time and effort. And they're busy, they're with the kids, they're doing all these things. And so for this one, we have a STEM lesson planner. Actually, I should say STEM instead of read aloud. I use these for the read alouds too, but it should be a STEM lesson activity. So these are the steps that I take for a lesson, right? And so, for example, let's say that we're going to use blocks today. And so we're going to build a house, or if they choose the school or whatever they choose, but this is just for the sake of the lesson planner. Here's the relevant concepts, and we're focusing on math: height, length, width, perimeter. You have your content objectives. And so when we write content objectives, we want to use the Bloom's taxonomy wheel. So you guys should have this. This is where we get our objectives. Because when we write objectives, they have to have a Bloom's taxonomy verb. So for example, number 1, children will identify. Identify is a Bloom's taxonomy verb. For number 2, children will create. That's a Bloom's taxonomy verb. For number 3, children will compare, contrast. That's a Bloom's taxonomy verb. And the reason why we do that is when we use Bloom's taxonomy verbs, those are measurable. We can measure, we can create data, because we can say, well, 10 out of the 20 kids identified this, or 15 out of 16 created this, or so and so compared and contrast. Like it's quantifiable, it's measurable. And that's really important, because I'm going to show you later some data that comes in handy when you're creating lessons, when you're creating data, and so forth. So whenever a teacher writes some objectives, make sure that a Bloom's taxonomy verb is embedded. And then you have your key vocabulary words. What I like about this is I always tell teachers, what are your key vocabulary words? In other words, what are the top 5 words children need to know to understand the concept of height? You see that? It's not just any words, especially for young children. It's just not any words. If we're working on a house and one of the concepts is height, what are the top 5 math words children need to know to really understand the concept of height, the concept of length, and perimeter, right? And so, for example, here, if you're building up, there's going to be more, less, long, short, tall, same, different. These words are needed to understand what height is, and it's also needed for when you ask higher order thinking questions about height. Sometimes children can't answer when you ask critically thinking questions because they don't have the key vocabulary words yet. They haven't had enough time, or they haven't been exposed to these words that align directly to a higher order question. So that's something to consider in the future. Like if you're going to have these high order thinking questions, children need specific language and words to be able to answer it. And so that's where this goes. The key vocabulary words, not just general words, there's very specific. And then you also want to write your higher order thinking questions. Like here it says, how do you think we're going to build a house with a roof that can hold 10 pounds? Like that's the higher order thinking. Like, really, you're going to build a house? I have the 10 pounds right here. We're gonna test it. We're gonna test your house to see if it can hold 10 pounds, right? Like that's higher order thinking. Can you conjecture? If you're using math, we say the word conjecture. If you're reading, if it's literature, we say prediction. They mean the same thing, but one's a mathematical word, one's a literature word. Why do you think this material did not hold 10 pounds? That's a higher order thinking question. Be prepared, it's 10 pounds. And that's the journey, right? To get a house that can hold 10 pounds. That's engineering. And so lastly, during that block construction, what are you going to do before the children engage in that lesson, during, and after? So before we start on this block play, you can ask, what do we know about houses? Let's look at photos of these houses or bridges or schools. How are houses built, right? So here we're talking about function. We're talking about foundations. How do you think we're going to build our own house? So those could be quick conversations that happen before they get started. And then as they're building this structure, you use your higher order thinking questions that you have written down, or other things that that come up as the process is going through. And when after they're finished, tell me how the house you built, what happened when you added 10 pounds to the top of the roof. Do you think it can hold 20, right? And then you challenge them again. Let's see, there's something in the chat here. Okay, I'll finish here and then I'll come back to the chat. And so this lesson planner, what I tell teachers is the process that you see in this lesson planner is what expert teachers do naturally, organically. Expert teachers jump into a block play, a water play, a drawing, a housekeeping dramatization, anything. And in their background, they have this process down packed, right? And so, for example, if I go into the block play, I have this memorized already, not based on what the children are doing, and this is how I'm going to engage them. And so the point here is that teachers can use this lesson planner, plus it's free, right? Like it's free as gold. And as they use it over time, eventually they're not going to need it, because that's who they become. And that's really important, that you have these critically thinking teachers that know how to engage children in a high quality manner. Let me check the chat, because there were some. Let's see, where are we? Focus thinking. These are great ideas. We have junkets. We take trips through boxes and buckets of junk. Okay, to see what we can do with things. Cool. Great. Okay, so I'm going to pause here for questions, comments about this lesson planner. So what are your thoughts about this lesson planner?
I'll unmute.
Okay, Tamara, thank you.
I really like it because I like the key vocabulary, because I think that is really important. And these higher order thinking skills, these questions, because the way they're asked too, you can test them out. So they can
Right.
test out what they've done to see, oh, does it work? And if it doesn't, what do we do next? I really like it.
Oh, good, Tamara. Thank you. And
I
then, yes,
I'm
please.
sorry.
Rosie.
I also liked it because I think it gets you as a teacher thinking. I'm a very visual person, so when I see something like this, I think I can use it and take it a step further. And those higher order thinking skills, something you can look back on and you can tweak them. What's working, what's not, tweak it a little bit. And because I think when you are teaching something, unexpected things come up, questions of the kids, or, oh, I didn't know that was going to happen. And I think this would be great, like next time I do it, this is what I should teach before or during and what came after. I really think it's a great planner. Thank you.
Great point. Thanks for sharing that, Rosie. You're right. And the reason why I say this is gold is you can recycle this. You can use it next year. You can scaffold off of this. And then, a prescribed curriculum is actually from you, the teacher, and they're able to reflect on it. If they recycle it in the future, they can think back about the experience. And like you're saying, Rosie, they can make it better, right? And that makes critically reflective teachers. And personally, I think that's missing a lot right now because of pre-described curriculums. I'm not, I mean, those are good, but when you allow teachers to be creative and innovative in their own curriculum development, oh my goodness, you get some, just fast thinking teachers. I know there were some comments in the chat, so let me look at that. I like how you see this fitting in with the IELTS benchmarks. Okay, They are required to use for pre-K. Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, because with not only do you fulfill the content standards, but also the process standards, right? Because of the thinking that's happening, the kind of thinking. This is a great way of looking and thinking beyond the normal. Great idea to plan, learn vocabulary, and math skills. Great. And then somebody asked about, I think it was, oh, it was Nicole. You should have that lesson planner. I think it was shot out to you all. And so I left it as a Microsoft as a Microsoft Word document so you guys can write into it. And it's a freebie, so. Cool. So you see how that works? When we think back at the protocol that I just showed you, each step in the protocol could be a lesson planner, you know? And it doesn't mean that the teacher has to write a lesson planner for every protocol activity, but in her mind, that's the process that she's going into. Like every lesson that we give children should be an in-depth lesson. And if you share this with your parents, your families, your teachers, this is professional work, you know, like teachers are being professional here. It's not just play. It's not just saying, you know, just sitting there and having the kids play. No, this is like specific language, specific inquiry that we're using, and strategic processes that are happening. All right, anybody else want to share before we move on? Just want to make sure this makes sense to you all, so that it's an asset for all of you to take back and just share out. So we talked about the protocol, we talked about the lesson planner. Now we're going to get into a little bit of the harder part, but it's like the best for children. And that is the thinking. And so you should all have this handout here. There's something I've written about in the past. Let's see if I can make it bigger. Oh yeah. Okay. And so here you see 4 columns that have to do with asking higher order thinking questions. Okay, so if you look at, besides the number line, I'll explain that in a second. But the second column there is called questioning approach. So I'm going to explain that in a second. But questioning approach is, it demonstrates how teachers engage children in their thinking process. So there's specific questions that are teacher-directed, teacher-guided, and child-centered. So that's this part here. That's what I call a questioning approach. In the third column there, it says questioning content. And that means, is the question that you're asking a STEM question at all? You know, I've literally recorded thousands of videos now. And many times teachers ask a lot of questions, but they ended up not being STEM questions. And we were focused on STEM. They were not math questions, and we were focused on math. You know, maybe they asked 50 social emotional questions or 50 socialization questions about the children's weekend. But it wasn't, in this case, a STEM question. The fourth column there is questioning type. That's the one that the field is more acquainted with. You know, whether the question that you ask is closed or if it's open-ended. And that's important. And then the questioning style is the hardest one at the end there on the right. That tells us if the question that the teachers are asking children are lower level thinking questions or higher level thinking questions. And so let me explain those in a second. And just to explain the sheet a little bit further, I use this sheet because in the professional learning communities that I facilitate, we videotape teacher practice. And so we'll videotape a teacher either doing a STEM lesson or a literacy lesson for 10 to 15 minutes. And then we write down every question that the teacher asked during those 10 to 15 minutes. Every question. And so when you look at this chart in line 1, that represents the first question that the teacher asked, and we code what kind of questioning approach was the first question, what kind of questioning content was the first question, what kind of questioning type and questioning style. And so we code every question that the teacher asks, and then that tells us our pattern. That tells us this is the experience that children had during your lesson. And I have some data to share with you in a little bit. But let's get started with approach first. So approach demonstrates how you as an educator begin to engage children in their thinking process. So what does that mean? So you have 3 approaches to the questions that you ask. So every question that you ask might be either a teacher-directed question, a teacher-guided question, or a child-centered question. Out of the 3, what do you think we want to hear the most in a classroom? You can write it on the chat or just unmute and say teacher-directed, teacher-guided, or child-centered. What do y'all think? Let's see, chat. Child-centered, child. Oh, okay. See, I love this group. You can tell you guys are experienced. Yeah, for sure, right? Child-centered. Like we all want child-centered. But let me tell you, I've done this for over 12 years now. And the majority of the questions that teachers have asked from hundreds of teachers have been teacher-directed questions. And it's normal because until they're able to analyze themselves and to see the kinds of questions they're asking, they might not know that they're asking mostly teacher-directed questions. And so a teacher-directed question, when you think about cognitive activity, in other words, like when you're asking a higher order thinking question, your synapses are going crazy, like in your brain. You know, we talk about brain development. When you ask a higher order thinking question, you have to identify, recognize, create, innovate. Like your brain is going like this. When we ask a teacher-directed question, it's not. It's usually something that you already know. And so the cognitive activity is on the educator side because they came up with the question. And it's for the children, it's easy and a quick response. It's memory-based. So if I were to say, hey, Rosie, what color is the tree that's behind you? What would you say?
I would say, as a child, I would say probably red, whatever color I see, yellow.
But no, I'm looking at your picture right now. There's a beautiful tree behind you.
Oh, oh, I thought you said maybe the one that I would see inside.
Oh, sorry.
Like if it was fall, right now that is kind of brown.
Okay, so brown, right? So when you came up with the answer brown, you didn't have to think much. You already knew. So your synapses aren't going crazy. You know, that the cognitive activity is not like heavy. It's really light because it's memory based. And so when we just ask, what color is this? What shape is this? What number is this? That's okay. But if that's all we do, we're doing a big disservice to the children. And that's what I see happening in hundreds of classrooms right now, is that many are still doing only skill-based instruction, where it's like, what shape is this? What color is this? What number is this? And then they go to kindergarten thinking they're ready, and they're not, because school is going to get harder for them. And unless they're engaging in critically reflective experiences, you know, they might not be successful. Teacher-guided questions, the cognitive activity is more active now, and it's shared between the educator and the children. So I would say, in general, like 50-50, like the teacher's thinking about the question and the child's thinking about the question. It's semi-challenging, and it's always about scaffolding a reasoning or problem-solving situation. And so that one, there's more cognitive activities. There's still a challenge. And so those are really important as well. One example I can give is you might have a child who's building blocks and it keeps falling over, keeps tipping over, right? And so I might say, I might know where the problem is, which is like right here, because there's a misalignment. So it keeps falling. So instead of giving the answer, I would say, hey, Nicole, if you look in this area, can you find out what the problem is? And then the child goes there and says, well, these two blocks are not aligned, right? And so they find the problem on their own with a little bit of scaffolding, and then they fix it. And so that's guided questioning, where you don't give them the answer, you let them figure it out on their own through a little guidance. And then the third one, which everybody said, yeah, we all have to provide more child-centered. That one, the cognitive activity is mostly on the child side, right? It's more challenging. The thinking is more challenging. There's more reasoning and problem solving. What I like to tell teachers is, as a rule of thumb, it's not always the case, but this is the way I see it. A teacher directed is an I, teacher guided is a we, and child-centered is a you. So for a teacher-directed question, I want to know what you know about this, right? Like I want to know. For teacher-guided questions, let's figure it out together. We want to know this. And for a child-centered question, it's you. What do you think? What can you do to fix this? How would you complete this project or whatever the task is? And so as a rule of thumb, I like to see it as the I, the we, and then the you. And that helps teachers remember to ask these higher order thinking questions. Okay, let me see the chat. There's somebody. Tell me more, and how did you know our questions we try to add to our conversations each day? That's great. Yeah, the you, how did you know, right? Like that's a you. That's great. That's a child-centered question. I have signs up to remind me. Good, yeah. Having signs is great. Having I've had teachers create these charts themselves and they just put it on the wall until they feel more comfortable. Okay, so a little quiz. If I say, how many blocks do you have? Is that teacher directed, teacher guided, or child centered? What do y'all think? Feel free to unmute. Feel free to put in the chat. So Shannon says directed. Directed. Awesome. Yes, definitely directed, because it says, I want to know how many blocks you have, right? And the child's going to say 5, 4, 3, it's memory based. So that's good. Second one, can we figure out how to keep the tower from falling from the bottom of the structure? What about that one? Shannon says guided, Queen says directed, Nicole says guided. Cool. The interesting thing about asking questions, with just one word, you can change it from a directed to a guided, or from a guided to a child-centered. It's sometimes it's very slim difference, but there is a difference. So here, we got to figure out a problem. So that means that I'm not asking a memory-based question, so it can't be a directed question. And I said we, so we're going to look at this together. So that gives you a clue that it's guided, So yeah. And then the third one, what can you do to keep the tower from falling? And I already see some people saying this will be a child-centered question, right? Yep. And so the second question and the third one are very similar, but one, all the cognitive activity is on the child side, and the other one is shared. So they're both important, right? Great. I think you caught them. see, this could be a yes or no question. Like if we followed up with the simple question of how, yeah. All right. So we're gonna move on to content. And like I mentioned before, is it a STEM question or is it a math question? That's really important. Because teachers, some of them ask a lot of questions, but they may not be math or STEM. They might be just socializing questions. And that's a different focus. You know, this is an instructional lesson. This is academic language. And if we just talk about our socialization, what we did over the weekend or what you do with the family, I mean, that's fun. So you include those, but when it's an instructional lesson, then it should be focused. So here, math, how many blocks tall are you going to make your castle? How many cups of water do you think we'll need to fill up the container? How many feet do you think Goldilocks traveled? How many more teddy bear counters do we need to make another group? So those are specific, right? And same thing, when I'm engaging children in anything, you can mathematize. You can mathematize in the blocks, in the water play, when they're drinking water, during mealtime, as they're walking out on a neighborhood walk. There's endless opportunities to ask math or STEM questions. Other content could be, what color is this? That's science at the lower level. How was your weekend? That's socialization. Do you like our classroom pet? You know, that's just a socialization. How does the leaf feel? That's science. And what is the name of the street you live in? Okay, I'm going to show this video. So grab me 1 second as I switch screens. What I'd like you to do is find listen for 2 questions that you thought were child-centered questions. Okay. And then let us know what kind of a STEM question was it. And when I say STEM, was it a science question, a technology question, an engineering question, or a math question? You got it? So just 2, so to make it nice and simple. So here we go.
Now comes Captain America.
Why are you adding more characters to the story?
Because I like all the person from the marbles. I'm gonna make Captain America and Hawk Smash.
Do you like a lot of superheroes involved in your story? They're all going to contribute. Will they all have their own specific power?
Yep.
Very nice to your friend. Very nice. Playing, working. Look.
I know. I'm making a story.
So how will Iron Man help the people catch?
He's gonna make rocket powers.
Oh, so he's gonna shoot rockets.
Yep.
So I think the rocket.
It will have to go across Captain America.
What does the power look like? Can you draw the power?
Explosion.
Show me the explosion.
A long way to make it to the bad cat.
How far?
68.
Use your measuring tool.
There's not a fire. That's the fire. We're not.
Start at the starting point. Start with number 1. Find number 1.
Oh,
See how many inches away the energy. What is it? The power or the energy? Oh,
yeah. This is backwards.
it's backwards. Where's number 1? Look at the end. Found it?
Yep.
All right. Number 1.
Okay.
What part will this travel? Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Nope. They have to make it slow to swim. They have to make it like into 23 hours.
23 inches?
Yep.
Very nice. That's pretty far away.
If you want to see the table more longer, then you should check out this.
Could stretch the measuring tape all the way across.
Whoa!
It's pretty long. How long is it?
50.
50 inches?
50 0.
50 is 50. What is it?
6
50.
6:30.
Well, 6.
So let's pause there and I'll give you 10 seconds to think about this experience. And if you saw any STEM components being worked on just through a drawing. All right, let's see. Looking at the chat. It's hard to understand. However, I heard how far, how long is it? Great. Yep. Cindy, here's some measurement questions. Karen, how far? Asking how far. Yep.
I wanted to add that I don't know when he was saying that it was exploding. It was
Yeah.
very hard to understand, but I thought that was like a science question. I think you could take
Yeah.
it like, what was exploding, and
Perfect.
that one. And I also seen when they said of the measuring,
Mhm.
that would be kind of math, counting from 1 to 23.
Mhm.
So.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Good catch, Rosie. Thank you. There's some more in the chat here. Thank you, Jaina. I did hear them ask if he could draw the rocket powers. Yeah, that's engineering right there. Well, we did that. That's engineering, right? And if you think about it, let's see, Nicole, I heard how do you think question about the superpowers? Yep. Concepts of measurement in inches, good. Draw power, good. I'm glad you guys caught that. Nicole just said a lot. Couldn't hear very clear, but what I could, teacher guidance, but child-centered math, technology, engineering. Great, great. And so typically, what I tell teachers, especially with drawings, if you look at the child's character drawing, he has the stick figures. You guys see that? And so when children draw a stick figure, they're not learning anything. And you might think like, what? And the reason why I say that is when they do a stick figure, they already know how to do it. That means they know already, right? They're not learning something new. But when I asked him to draw his power, right? The energy. Now you brought in an engineering component into the drawing. And if you look at in the middle of this screen here, the power is in motion. That's what that is. So if you see the red and the blue that's moving from left to right, that's power in motion. And so if you think what's happening in the brain right now, I could have just stopped with him doing a stick figure and call it a day. He does a stick figure, I say, good job, and then I put it on the wall, and then I go about my business. That's not okay. No, I'm sorry. That is okay, but that's basic skills. That's simple. It's like if we only do simple drawings that they already know how to do, then it's okay for enjoyment, right? It's okay for recreational purposes. But if it's a lesson, then follow their lead. And they were interested and he was interested in power. So I'm like, represent it. What does power look like to you? So for him to draw the motion of power from one superhero to the mean black cat that's on the right side, I guess. Think about what's happening in the head, that representation and that motion, and then he has to put that on paper. That's critical thinking not only through the talking about it, but also through the process of drawing it. And I wanted to show this because anytime children draw something, even with drawings, you can have engineering concepts embedded in there, right? When children are creating with blocks, what's engineering? I mean, look at our homes. There's electrical engineering, right? We have stoves. You might ask children, how do the stoves work? Where does the electricity come from? How does it come into the house? How does it get to the stove? And you might take a neighborhood walk and look at the electrical poles, right? And look at the wires, and then have them represent that. The gas, the water, the plumbing, like how does that work? The sewer, I mean, all of that, the function and structure of things. That's what engineering is. Even when they're cooking, right? When they're in the housekeeping area and they're cooking, that's engineering as well, because they have to cook. They have to use electricity. They have to use tools and machinery, blenders and all these types of tools, technology. And so in anything that that you engage children, you can always embed STEM conversations in there over time. Let's see something in the chat. By asking about the power, you go from okay to stellar. Yeah, good. Shannon, excellent. In our neighborhood, we can look at the wind farm. Excellent. That'd be great. And the solar fields. It's so cool. Yeah, you can make your own. You can have your own lessons about wind power in the classroom. Wind power from the mouth, from your breath that comes out, from little fans, from little turbines, different ways to explore wind power. For sure. So I hope that was helpful to see how that can be embedded there. Let me go back to our PowerPoint presentation.
Alan, I just wanted to add to that. I wasn't prepared for it, but something funny happened about air. We had balloons in the classroom, and one of the kids put it by the univent. And as the univent was glowing, it kept the balloon in the air. And the kids were like, wow, I just didn't know, I wasn't expecting it, it came, from the kid. We had, we were having like a fair or something, and that's where they got the balloons from. And the balloon, when the univent blew out the air, it would just kept the balloon up in the air, and it was going and going and going. But they were really amazed by it. I was surprised, and I said, oh, you know what? I have to get more balloons and just have it there so they can see that when it's on, it will keep them up. And when it's not on, the balloon just sits there,
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, you can do a whole study on wind power, and try different things, different locations, different heights. This doesn't mean that you don't do your pre-described curriculum. You could do these on the side. You can do these projects on the side. All right. Thanks for sharing, everyone. Okay, math type. This is the closed and open-ended questions. We are more aware of this one. The only thing to remember here, closed-ended is simple. Many times it's a so there's two ways for it to be closed-ended. Either it's a simple response, like a one-worded response, or it's a whole sentence that they already know. So if they already know the answer, like if we say, what did Goldilocks eat in the house? And they say porridge. They ate porridge, right? Like they already know that. So that's a closed-ended question. So it could be a one-word response, or it could be a full sentence, but they already know it. Open-ended questions are more challenging. It's really about generating ideas. When you ask open-ended questions, they have to generate ideas to come up with an answer. And again, it's all about the cognitive activity, getting those synapses up and going. So, are you 4 years old? Yes. Can you give her 5 more blocks? Yes. Which dinosaur is taller? This one. Which block weighs more? This one. Like all those are closed-ended questions. Now, if you ask, tell me how you plan to make the tower 3 feet tall. Boom. They have to generate ideas for each one of these. How can we divide the melon so that our friends get a piece, and so forth? And then the last one is the hardest one, but if you master this, it's phenomenal. And this is about questioning styles. So at the top, attention focusing, recall, those are considered lower level thinking questions, because one is just to get them to pay attention to either the project or something. Recall is just memory based, right? So anytime we ask something that the children already know, it's a recall question. And those are good as warm-ups. You know, when we do exercise, how we have to warm up our body, the parts of the body that we're going to exercise. Recall questions are good for that. They're good to warm up the brain, and they're also good for the teacher to find out what a child knows about something. But you can't stay there, right? You can't stay there. You gotta move up. Conjecture, prediction questions, comparison questions, and then you get to the higher level thinking questions. Those top three, even though they're on the bottom: reasoning, problem posing, and proof. So reasoning is a perspective on a matter. Problem posing is having them solve some problems. And then proof is solving problems with validation. Like, I solved this problem and then you validate it with facts. Those three are considered higher order thinking opportunities for children. And they're the hardest ones to do. And so teachers just have to practice over time. Oh, thanks, Shannon. Try other things, feathers, plastic, groceries. Yep. Awesome. Okay, so we're gonna, how much time do we have? We have like 15 minutes. Okay, we could do this. So let's code our questions here. And so with this one, let's see. Let's code them together. So the first one says, can you stack the blocks up high? What kind of questioning approach could that be? Teacher directed, teacher guided, or child centered? Oh, sorry, my puppy's at it. What would you say? If we ask a child, can you stack the blocks? Johnny, can you put them in the kennel, please? Thank you. Just for now. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Here we go. Teacher directed, teacher directed. Good. Good. And is this a STEM question? So is it a science question, a technology question, an engineering question, or a math question? Shannon says math. Math. Awesome. Awesome. Good job. So yeah, because we're talking about the height, right? Like, how many can you build up? So that's a math question. So even though it's a math question, it's a teacher directed question. So these kinds of questions are good at the start of a construction process. So even though it's closed-ended, it's teacher directed, and it's math, it's important in the beginning of a project, because it's like a warm-up, right? The second one, why does the tower keep falling? Would that be teacher directed, teacher guided, or child centered? All right, so now we're getting, are you all copying each other here? Okay, here we go. Here's a different answer. So most of you said guided. There's one teacher directed. Anybody else? And one says child centered. Oh, good. See, this is good. So we have an answer for all of these. So that's good. All right. So when we look at this, oh, excuse me. When we look at this question, Another teacher directed, okay. Why does the tower keep falling? So it's definitely not a teacher directed question because the child doesn't know yet, right? So if I were to say, did the tower fall? Then that's a teacher directed question. Okay, so now we have two choices, guided or child-centered. And I said, why does the tower keep falling? Because I didn't give a clue, it's a child-centered because it all falls in the child's doing his own analyzation and his own perspective sharing. So this would be a child-centered question. What can we, oh, I gave you the answer there. What can we do to keep the tower from falling? What would you say there? Guided, yeah. Good, you guys remember the rule of thumb, right? I, we, you. It's not always, it doesn't always land, but it's just a quick thing to remind us. Right now we're asking a we, like we're working on this together. Let's do this together, right? So I'm guiding you to the truth of something without telling you the answer. That's really important. And then if I say, did it work? What is that directed, guided, or child-centered? So I got one directed. Let's see what the group keeps saying here. Directed. Okay, great. You got it. Yeah, you got the hang of this. Good. Excellent. And then the last one, how can we connect your tower with her tower? That's a big one there. What would you say? So I got guided. And it says closed, directed, but if you said why, did it work? Okay. Guided. Yeah, so this one is guided. We have the we there, but it is higher order thinking because to connect two towers, you gotta problem solve. That's engineering, and you gotta, right? So it's difficult. All right, you guys all passed. Excellent. All right, so let's get to the final few slides. This one talks about a STEM building project timeline. And so some projects will take months, 2-3 months. And so one way you can engage in projects that are STEM related is by, we talked about that the first time, right? The importance of exploring and investigating, like give children the time to explore things and to investigate things so that eventually they can produce some great things. And so in this example, you might do, March, maybe you do sometime a week or two to explore. I mean, they can still build things, but you're doing a lot of exploration, a lot of investigation. And then by April, once you build up all this background knowledge through your exploration and investigations, you start designing things, building things, and then you produce a final structure that's spectacular because you've been able to scaffold over 2 months on something. You can your own project timeline. It could be a month, it could be 2 weeks, right? But it's always good to have a project timeline to have to follow there. All right. Okay, let's see. So this one here, take a look at this structure here. So what would a science question sound like here? So if you saw this structure here and the kiddos built this up, it almost looks like a Jenga. But these are called Kiva blocks. They're spectacular. K-E-V-A. Keva or Kiva blocks, one of those, might be Keva. But what could be a good science question for this? What could be a nice technology question? What could be a good engineering question? And what could be a good math question? Feel free to unmute or just throw it in the chat. How tall do you think the tower is? Okay, so that's a good math question. Yeah. That's a good conjecture, right? They'd have to conjecture how tall it is. Let's see, how do you keep it balanced? That's a good science one, good. How many feet do you think it is? That's a good math. Height. Can you measure the tower with a tool? Yeah, that's math. Is it taller than you? Okay, that's a conjecture. Good math one. Great. How long did it take you to create? Like, good time, though. That's math. What did you use to put this together? Yeah, that's a good science, right? It talks about the materials. Great. Some opportunities for STEM questions here could be, let's say you're the kiddo that did this, right? And then I ask you, what wouldn't, this is a tall building. How could you create an elevator that fits inside the building? What kind of question do you think that is? I think, oh, give me 1 second here. Let me look at the chat. Engineering, you got it. I think the people inside don't like to be in darkness. How can we create an electrical system to help them have light? Another engineering question, right? I think the people in there need stoves, so they won't need gas, or they need water or plumbing system. Like, all of that is engineering. And then you bring in materials that actually builds it, right? Like we've had kids, you can buy some gears at Home Depot with some string and some tape and some cups, and they make their own little elevators that work, right? You can buy some little circuits and you add some light bulbs in there that really work when you put a battery. There's all these little components that you can bring into the classroom, simple ones. And now you're adding, oh, I saw Shannon drinking straws make great pipes. Oh, that's pretty cool too, right? Yeah, and now it's like, okay, we're taking this structure, which is great. You started that. Now let's build it up. Now let's do some real STEM. Like, that's one part of STEM. Now let's do engineering. We're bringing in the light. Okay, that's technology. Electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, even environmental engineering. We need plants. People need to survive. How do we build the environment on the outside to grow food? So now I got to engineer systems of developing food outside of your structure. And that's why this could take a long time, because if you add different components of engineering, that's spectacular. 2 weeks of mechanical engineering, 2 weeks of electrical, 2 weeks of environmental. And now you're being innovative. The teachers are being innovative because they're maybe stepping into unknown curriculum experiences that they haven't had. And what I've seen is that the teachers enjoy it because they learn something new and they're learning it with the kids. And it's a lot of fun. And so the last thing I wanted to share with you, I talked about the professional learning communities. I have different kinds, and we collect data, right? And so the data we collected on this one is for them asking questions. And so in this professional learning community, we had 39 teachers, and we've been together for a while, since fall of 2021. And so this one shows the amount of questions that were asked. So in the fall of 2021, together as a community, we asked children 384 questions. A few months later, they went up to 439 questions. A year later, the same community asked 941 questions, right? And so this is spectacular because I always say that that's what the power of professional learning communities are, is that the communities coming together and the communities growing together over time, right? it's one thing for to have one teacher go to a training and then come back, and it's, you know, great, you had a training, but it's one teacher. It's another thing when you have, these teachers are all in the same organization where I work at Carol Robertson Center, where they all come together with those that are focused on STEM. There's another group that's focused on anti-bias literacy. And as a group, as a collective, this is how we've grown together. So then we talk about the different kinds of questions that we asked. For a questioning approach, which we kind of talked about a little bit, in the fall of 2021, teachers asked 370 teacher-directed questions, 352 in the spring, and then 786 in spring of 2023. And so that more than doubled. And even though they were teacher-directed questions, that's okay. Because what that's telling me is that they're asking more questions and they're trying. You know, everyone's going to be at a different competency level based on where they're at, and that's okay. But just the fact that there's more questions being asked is already good. In terms of teacher-guided questions, you know, compared to 2, now they ask 28 as a group. And then child-centered is my favorite because they jumped from 12 to 127 questions. And that's not easy. You know, that's the hardest one. When we move forward, are they STEM questions or not, right? And so if you see in fall of 2021, 50 science questions, 44 in the spring, and then 103. Look at engineering. I love that. So as a community, right? And this means like in, let's say, more 20 to 25 classrooms, probably 25 classrooms. Before, they had asked 28 engineering questions and it jumped to 475. That means that the children in our community are getting this. And this is just 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes in one shot. Imagine if it's 10 minutes every day, or 10 minutes now, and then 10 minutes later, and then 10 minutes. I mean, that's what we want. We want to be able to create a STEM culture where STEM language and STEM questions are being asked all the time. That's how you create real STEM competency in these classrooms, where we build a STEM culture, where we're asking these kinds of questions throughout the day. And this was just 10 minutes a day. In terms of open and closed, there were a lot more closed in the questions, but look at the open ones. It went from 12 in fall of 2021 to 160, which is spectacular. Again, we have different, it's not just lead teachers or assistant teachers, some teacher aides, right? So it's a community. We don't see it as just the lead teachers. If you're in the classroom, right, you're in this community. And so, and then the last one is the question style. And remember the attention focusing, and those are important as well. So that those grew, the recall questions grew too. And that's just telling me that they're trying, like there's more questions. So that's good for the children, even if it's memory based. But then the predictions went up, the problem posing shot up a lot, which is high order thinking, went from 8 to 74. And then the reasoning jumped from 5 to 60. So those I'm really happy about. The problem posing and reasoning. I mean, if you compare in the fall of 2021, out of 39 teachers, only 8 problem posing questions were asked. And only 5 reasoning questions were asked. And by spring of 2023, a lot more, right? 74 problem posing questions, 60 reasoning questions, which is so important. So I just wanted to share that. It's open forum, but I brought some foundational things about exploration and investigation last time we met. Today, a lot of methodology, right? Like these protocols and how to build these protocols. The lesson planners, like in each step of these lessons, you can use a lesson planner so that it's in depth. I shared how we can have teachers, videotape themselves and then code the kinds of questions they're asking. There's 4 different kinds of questioning approaches you can use: the approach, content type, style. When teachers, if you can build this in teachers, they become expert inquiry-based teachers. I'm telling you, that's what we want. We want teachers to be expert inquiry-based teachers. And then the data, right? The importance of do some data. It's really important, because here the teachers see their own practices, they see their own data, they're able to analyze and reflect on their own data, and then they can plan to build themselves up. And that's what expert teachers do, is they know how to self-assess and how to self-transform their own practices. And so there you go. Gave you a lot of ideas, a lot of things you can use. How about some feedback? What are some takeaways that you'll be able to use for yourself and for your community? Feel free to unmute. What are some takeaways? I see people writing on the chat there. The protocol and lesson planner, good. Tamara, great. And just be creative. Protocols are endless. You can create your own. What about others? Do you want to use the lesson planner? Good. Yep. More child-centered and guided questions. Excellent, Carrie. Thank you. Yep. We'll share the planning with peers. So as a question guide for my assistants. Awesome. Starting small and hope to have some serious improvement. Good, good, great. I'm excited to go back and use some better questions. Excellent. Yeah, STEM questions. Be more conscious of questioning. Excellent. Yes, 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 yes. I see a heart, so that's good. Interested in trying this out in our classroom. More in-depth thinking and good, great questions. Be more proactive about planning and evaluation reflection. Great. Think about the types of questions, ask the kids, try to make more child-centered. All right. Well, that sounds great to me. So that's, I'm so excited for you all. I wish you the best of luck in everything you do. If you ever have questions, just feel free to reach out and we'd be happy to help out.